They laughed, not with you, but at you. At the empty resume, the quiet birthdays, the years that didn't sparkle online. They said you missed your moment, that if you weren't early, you'd never arrive. And for a while, you believed them. You carried that shame until it hardened. But look at me, this isn't a pity tale. It's a warning. Because here's what they never understood. The longer the fuse, the bigger the explosion. Early winners rush to be noticed. Late bloomers learn to notice. That's the difference. One chases noise, the other studies patterns, then acts once, decisively. They laugh because you started late, but they forgot what late really means. It means you arrive after the illusions die. You don't build for attention. You build for endurance. You don't wait for permission. You pick the lock no one else even saw. And when it opens, the entire room is yours. Open your phone. Scroll through the highlights that made you feel like you're falling behind. Viral today, forgotten tomorrow. Shiny, hollow, fast, fragile. That's not success. That's a countdown. Napoleon Hill tried to warn them. Habit becomes law. Repeat a thought long enough, and it becomes the air you breathe. They inhaled too late. You're about to exhale command. Listen closely. There are 3 hidden advantages to starting late. Selection, you choose better games. Clarity, you waste less motion. Immunity, you stop asking for permission. That's why the quiet ones are dangerous. The ones who vanish before they reappear. The ones who don't announce, they arrive. If you're hearing this, you're not behind, you're loading. Flip the hourglass you feared. Watch the sand climb back up. Time isn't your judge. It's your ally if you learn to use it. And in the next few minutes, I'll show you how late wins on purpose. How to turn the years they mocked into leverage they'll never catch. How to sharpen your selection lens to kill wrong goals. How to forge yourself until you're unbreakable. How to install auto-suggestion to replace doubt with direction. How to purge your environment so other people's decay never becomes your destiny. You owe no one an explanation for your timing, but you owe yourself a decision. So keep scrolling, keep counting other people's laps, or light the fuse you've spent a decade wiring. They laughed because you started late. Good, when you finish, they won't laugh, they'll ask how. This isn't a comeback. It's an arrival. Start late. When? Now. There's a lie so common, so quietly repeated, that most people never realize they've swallowed it whole. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And it sounds like this. You should have figured it out by now. You're too old to start over. That ship has sailed. You hear it in passing comments, in the tilt of someone's head when you say you're still figuring things out, in the smirk that follows the phrase, "He's still chasing that?" No one says it directly, but it's written everywhere, in headlines, in casting calls, in startup pitches. The message is simple. If you haven't made it by 30, you're late. And if you're over 40 and still dreaming, still evolving, still daring to try, the world doesn't see courage, it sees delusion. But stop for a second. Who decided life peaks in your 20s? Who decreed that your best ideas, your deepest insights, your most lasting contributions must happen before your brain even finishes maturing? That's not biology, that's branding. Hollywood worships youth because it sells tickets. Tech glorifies youth because it sells the fantasy of the 19-year-old billionaire. Schools idolize youth because it keeps the treadmill of standardized achievement alive. It's not about truth, it's about profit. And we bought it. Because when you're young, hype feels like greatness. Speed feels like success. You think that if you're not sprinting, you're already behind. So you run, not to build something real, but to keep up with someone else's timeline. That sprint? It wasn't ambition. It was fear. Fear of being left out. Fear of being unseen while others were. Celebrated. And every scroll made it. Worse, Instagram, TikTok, the endless highlight reel. Younger, faster, louder, richer. Each post another whisper. You're too late. But here's the truth that burns through that lie. You didn't fail. You were programmed. Napoleon Hill called it the law of cosmic habit force. The idea that any thought, repeated long enough, becomes internal law. It stops being outside you. It becomes you. That voice in your head saying, "It's too late." That's not intuition. That's not realism. That's residue. Leftover programming installed by a culture that confuses youth with value. Think about it. What does youth actually give you? Energy, yes. Confidence, sometimes. But it also brings inexperience, fragile identity, and dependence on outside validation. The world treats youth as the pinnacle, not because it's wise, but because it's loud. It mistakes volume for value, noise for depth, and shine for substance. That's why so many early winners burn out. They built their identity on speed, not strength, on applause, not awareness, on virality, not vision. Their success was a sprint. And sprints don't last. Meanwhile, you, the so-called late one, kept walking. You kept learning. You kept collecting dots while they burned out connecting the wrong ones. And here's the paradox the culture refuses to admit. Speed impresses in the short run, but wisdom wins in the long one. The obsession with youth isn't a celebration of truth. It's a distraction. A spell meant to keep you chasing, doubting, apologizing for your timing. But look closer. The illusion is cracking. The child star collapsing in their 30s. The startup genius burning out before 35. The influencer who goes viral, then fades into irrelevance, because speed without a foundation is a countdown. And when the timer hits 0, nothing remains. That's why the lie had to exist, because if too many people realize that slower, deeper lives create unshakable power, the system built on fear and urgency would crumble. So they disguised patience as weakness. They labeled wisdom as irrelevance. They branded slowness as failure, and you believed it. Until now, because here's what they'll never say out loud. You're not running late. You're running differently. You're not behind. You're building at another level. That the world measures you with clocks. But clocks can't measure awareness. And awareness, the kind that only comes from time, scars, and silence, is worth more than any sprint the culture worships. So the next time you hear that whisper, "You're too late," remember this. That isn't truth speaking. It's programming echoing. You're not here to echo. You're here to rewrite. So let's rewrite the story. If being late was truly a weakness, then why do so many of the fast ones collapse? Why do the early prodigies, the 20-something stars, fade before the ink on their success even dries? Because when victory comes before identity, you end up performing a life that doesn't belong to you. You please, you pretend, you chase applause without direction. You run fast, but you don't know where you're going. And when the applause stops, so do you. That's not power. That's dependency disguised as achievement. Late bloomers are different. They're built in silence, forged through years of invisibility, tempered by rejection, sharpened by loss. Every disappointment shapes their steel. By the time you've reached your late 30s, 40s, or 50s, you've already lived enough cycles to see patterns others miss. The young see events. You see systems. They react. You recognize. You've failed, rebuilt, endured, repeated mistakes until you learned their rhythm. That's why you can walk into a room and sense what's unsaid. Why you spot the trap before others notice the bait. Pattern recognition isn't theory. It's scars turned into sight, intuition crafted from memory, wisdom carved by time. And that wisdom makes you unshakable in a world addicted to speed. Because speed without pattern recognition isn't progress, it's motion without meaning. Youth breaks under rejection, one no, and it collapses. But you've been there. You've fallen, then humiliated, and kept walking. You've carried disappointment until it no longer crushed you. It trained you. Resilience isn't loud. It isn't a quote on social media. It's the quiet refusal to stay down. The muscle you grow by falling and standing over and over until standing becomes instinct. That invisible armor doesn't sparkle, but it saves you. When pressure hits, you don't shatter. You absorb it. You redirect it. You outlast it. Because the world always underestimates the one who's been hardened in silence. When you're young, ego drives every move. Every success is a performance. Every failure feels like humiliation. Every action is about being seen. But age rewrites that equation. You stop needing to prove. You stop chasing every compliment or craving every like. Instead, you refine. Your clarity no longer comes from ambition. It comes from awareness. You know what matters, and more importantly, you know what doesn't. That's why late bloomers make fewer moves, but each one lands with precision. Every decision cuts through noise. Every step carries intention. Every action is powered by purpose, not ego. And purpose, that quiet, steady force, is infinitely stronger than applause. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. And here's the truth. That doesn't happen in your 20s. In your 20s, you're still wearing masks handed down by parents, teachers, culture, society. You're still performing borrowed identities. Still addicted to approval. Still living inside other people's definitions of success. It's only later, when those masks start to crack, when roles collapse and silence corners you, that the authentic self begins to rise. When you've lost the performances, when you've outgrown the scripts, when the noise fades, you finally hear your real voice. And yes, it's terrifying, because it means letting go of who you thought you were. But it's sacred too, because it means becoming who you actually are. That's why the late bloomer carries a depth the young can't yet hold. The real self doesn't bloom early. It blooms when it's ready. And when it does, nothing can shake it. Think of a blade. The one forged too quickly may gleam at first glance, but it bends with the first strike. Yet the blade that's heated, hammered, cooled, and hammered again becomes unbreakable. That's the late bloomer, not fragile steel, but tempered steel. Not shiny, sharp. Not fast, fatal. The world mocked your waiting, but waiting was the weapon. Because what takes longer to build, takes longer to break. So remember, you are not behind. You are becoming unstoppable. That's why late bloomers are dangerous, because by the time the world notices them, it's already far too late. Their fire doesn't flicker weakly. It roars with purpose. Their foundations don't tremble. They've been beaten, forged, and made unshakable. And when they finally step into the spotlight, they don't run, they don't shout, they simply walk in, and the air in the room shifts. True transformation never begins with applause. It begins in the only place that truly matters, the battlefield of your mind. And right now, that battlefield is occupied by an enemy voice. A script you never wrote, yet you've been reciting for years. I'm too late. No one will take me seriously. There's no time left. Every time you whispered those words, you weren't describing your life. You were programming it. Your subconscious didn't argue or resist. It saluted. It obeyed. Yes, sir. That's why so many people end up living the same year over and over again, 40 times, and calling it a life. Not because they never had chances, but because their mental programming never evolved. Picture your mind as a war room. On one side stands the old general, the voice of doubt, hesitation, and shame, barking orders. On the other side waits a new commander, ready to rise, but only one can lead. And most people, tragically, keep saluting the wrong one. Napoleon Hill called it autosuggestion, the law that any idea repeated often enough becomes internal truth. Most people assume they don't practice it, but they do. They've simply been practicing it in reverse, rehearsing their failures until they became identity. Autosuggestion isn't delusion. It's discipline. Fake it till you feel it isn't pretending. It's training your mind to accept a stronger version of you until the weaker one fades away. There are 3 mantras every late bloomer must plant, deep until they take root. 1. I am not late. I am right on time. 2. My scars are experience. My delays are depth. 3. I am not behind. I am prepared. Say them daily. Say them even if your voice trembles. At first, they'll sound like lies because your old self doesn't recognize this new language. But keep repeating, because eventually, the old general falls silent, and in that silence, the new self begins to speak. Not with excuses, not with apologies, but with commands. Because the real battle was never between you and the world, it was between you and the script running quietly inside your head. And now, it's time to rewrite that script. To give yourself commands you actually want obeyed. You can spend years reprogramming your mind, reciting affirmations, visualizing a stronger version of yourself, building habits of steel. But if you keep returning every night to the same environment of decay, you'll sink. Not because you lack discipline, but because environment always beats willpower. The danger is that toxic environments rarely appear toxic. They disguise themselves as home. They feel familiar, safe, comforting. They sound like the laughter of old friends, the warmth of family dinners, the conversations you've had 1,000 times. But listen closely to what hides beneath that comfort. At our age, you can't expect that anymore. It's too risky to start over now. Be realistic. These aren't harmless phrases, they're viruses. Spoken often enough, they infiltrate your identity. Not in one blow, but drop by drop, phrase by phrase, until one day you wake up living inside beliefs you never chose. Picture a single drop of water falling on stone, harmless, forgettable. But let it fall in the same spot every hour, every day, for years, and eventually, the stone is carved. Not through violence, but through repetition. That's what your environment does to you. Every cynical comment, every sigh about missed chances, every warning to play it safe, they're all drops wearing away at who you could become. And before you realize it, you start mistaking the echo of their fears for your own thoughts. Napoleon Hill didn't romanticize it. He warned us clearly. You become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not just financially, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. If your closest circle speaks in limitation, your mind will shrink to fit that cage. If they define life by fear, you will breathe it in like air. Because your subconscious listens not just to you, but to everyone you allow near you. Every repeated message is a seed, and if you don't guard your soil, your garden will fill with weeds you never planted. Here lies the cruel paradox: the people most likely to hold you back aren't your enemies. They're the ones who love you, but love you as the old version of yourself. They don't intend to sabotage you. They simply can't picture you outside the box they've placed you in, so they hand you comfort. But hidden inside that comfort is decay. And if you choose it long enough, it will quietly rot the future you're trying to build. Let's be clear, you don't have to cut everyone off. You don't have to vanish into the mountains or abandon humanity, but you do have to become a gatekeeper. Not of your time, of your energy. Boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of protection. They sound like, I still care about you, but I can't afford your influence right now. Suppression stays silent and absorbs the poison. Boundaries speak and refuse to drink it. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to argue. You simply have to stop letting their words become your internal script. So what does purification actually look like in real life? It looks like distance from people who love you, but unknowingly sabotage you. It looks like saying no to conversations that glorify regret, limitation, and fear. It looks like ending phone calls that always finish with, "Be grateful you got this far." It looks like walking away from nostalgic groups who only celebrate who you used to be. This isn't cruelty, this is survival. Because becoming something greater requires purification. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your growth. You only owe it protection. And here's the hard truth. You are not being polite when you let others pour poison into your mind. You are not being loyal when you sit through conversations that shrink you. You are being programmed. If you don't take control of your environment will control you. Never forget, the forge that made you strong is worthless if you return every night to a swamp. You cannot bloom in polluted soil. You cannot evolve surrounded by decay. The choice is clear: purify or stay broken. There's a quiet danger most people never recognize until it's far too late. It isn't failure. It isn't rejection. It isn't even fear. It's nostalgia. We like to imagine nostalgia as harmless, a soft golden memory of what once was. Childhood summers, youthful confidence, moments when life felt lighter, freer, more alive. But beneath its warmth hides a sharp blade. Because when you cling to who you used to be, you destroy who you're meant to become. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona. He understood that the masks we wear, the roles we play to survive certain chapters of life, eventually turn into prisons. The quiet achiever, the reliable worker, the forgiving lover. Those roles once protected you, gave you belonging. But hold them too tightly and they become chains. Here's the brutal truth. The person you were is not the person you need to be. Nostalgia disguises sabotage as comfort. It whispers, "Go back. Remember when life was easier? When you were admired? When you didn't have these scars?" And without realizing it, you start negotiating with ghosts, rehearsing old versions of yourself that never truly existed the way you remember them. It's self-sabotage wrapped in a lullaby. Think of it like a haunting. You're walking forward into the unknown, but behind you trails a shadow of who you were, whispering, tugging, convincing you that the past was safer, purer, better. And every time you look back too long, you freeze. You rot in place. That's why true transformation always feels like grief, because it is grief. You're not just chasing new opportunities. You're burying old selves, and that burial is heavy. Jung's insight is devastating but freeing. To grow, you must let the old persona die. The mask that once protected you must now be laid to rest, or it will strangle you. There comes a moment of brutal honesty when you must look at your former self and say the hardest words. "Thank you for getting me here, but I can't afford to be you anymore." It feels like betrayal, but it's actually loyalty. Loyalty to your future. Because the version of you who was liked, underestimated, or broken cannot carry you into what's next. You will know you've changed when silence no longer scares you. When you stop needing to explain your distance. When you stop apologizing for outgrowing what once felt like home. That's the quiet mark of evolution. Not louder confidence, not constant motivation, but calm detachment. You begin to understand that the people who misread your silence were never meant to hear your truth. They were only fluid in noise. It's not arrogance. It's clarity. You stop chasing rooms where your energy is misunderstood, and you start walking towards spaces where your presence doesn't need translation. You no longer beg to be seen. You choose to be known. That's when everything changes. The world tries to convince you that growth is supposed to look glamorous: endless productivity, new routines, public proof. But real growth is invisible. It happens in the dark, when you sit with your contradictions long enough to realize they're not weaknesses, they're blueprints. And once you stop hiding your depth to make others comfortable, you unlock something terrifying and beautiful: inner authority. The quiet certainty that you don't need validation to exist loudly. Carl Jung described this as individuation, the moment a person becomes whole, when the shadow and the self no longer fight, but integrate. It's not about becoming perfect, It's about becoming real. That's why, if you feel lost right now, good. It means the old map no longer fits the new territory. Confusion is proof that rebirth is happening. The fuse has been burning this whole time. Every heartbreak, every failure, every lonely night, they were all sparks preparing you for ignition. And now, after everything, the same silence that once felt unbearable becomes your greatest weapon. Because it no longer represents absence, it represents control. You've become the explosion they never saw coming. Not loud, not desperate, just inevitable. So let them wonder where you went. Let them whisper about your distance. You didn't disappear. You evolved. If this video found you today, it wasn't by accident. The timing was perfect. You were ready to hear it. So don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you next time.